Nice little breakdown in the little backtesting session. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to breaking it down with just a little bit of words and kind of explaining why we took that trade. So we're going to go ahead and start with that higher time frame, because if we understand that, that really lets us kind of get into the mindset of why we were looking at this trade, right? So when we start from that 4 hour, we can see, okay, when we're looking at the zones or our points of interest in this case, right, we can see that price had now reacted off our discount POI, right? And what that means is just the point of interest that is directly related to that break of structure, right? We see that break of structure cause this really big move, right? So understanding that this was that last push up lets us know that this is that discount POI, right? So as we move on a little bit more, right, we see, okay, price did tap here. And one thing you might have noticed in the video is over here, I was kind of moving around on these candles to see what happened, right? And all I was doing is seeing if this high actually went higher than this one, right? Because otherwise it would have just been liquidity. But if this high actually captured all of these highs, that's a good efficient move that swept highs before creating a nice break, right? So after seeing that, we can validate that, cool, this created a nice push to the downside. So one thing as well you saw me going back on was kind of going over this right here, if I wanted to call it a break of structure or just label it as this red thing, right? And when I label something in red like that, usually it's just me saying it's kind of some type of internal break of structure that I want to pay attention to. And in this move, it was pretty important because I could see, okay, not only did price break this, but as it continued to go lower, failed to actually tap into demand, right? So that tells me price still has a reason to actually want to go lower. So as we go lower, right, we started out with our POI being all of this candle, but then we're able to lower, refine it down a little bit lower, I believe on this hourly. Yeah, so on that hourly, we were able to go ahead and find it right there. And so once we had identified that price had tapped into this supply zone, we were then able to start moving down to our lower time frame and seeing kind of what was happening, right? So myself personally, I always like to use the 15-minute to kind of let myself ease into the trade. I want to give price time to actually, build the trade before I just hop right in. So in this case, what do we see, right? All right, well, price tapped into that supply, created a low, failed to make a new high, right? So that's already showing good, intentions that price wants to actually start moving down. And as we started coming lower, what do we see, right? Price just builds up this whole area of just consolidation, right? So when we see that, we know, okay, the bottom side is liquidity and so is the top side. So in this case, we sweep to the bottom, but what do, right? Yes, in a sense, we kind of mitigate this order block, but we just drop even more liquidity, right? A whole bunch of orders just sitting in this area. So as we're coming back up, that's why I know I wanted to target this area, right? And if we go down to our entry time frame, we know that, okay, 15-minute, sorry, let me go back real quick. So 15-minute, and let me back up one more step. So on for our TPs, right, even though we're targeting the supply, before we start making it lower, where we're expecting price to go is down into these demand levels, right? And we know we were looking at these demand levels from actually the previous trade, right? We had saw that we were looking for possible buys, and did end up getting taken out, but overall price still kind of did end up making its way to the upside. So after seeing price left this little gap here, right, which especially in Forex we typically don't see gaps, so I definitely wanted to target that for price to kind of clean that up and give us a nice clean move into this demand, right, which created this break of structure. So that's why, once again, knowing we can target from the high of this range all the way down to the low, kind of where that move was created, to kind of fill in all the gaps, right? So once again, now our 15-minute POI, the reason I chose this is because if we look over here, we'll see, okay, this was that last down candle before we actually went up. It's not the cleanest POI in the world, but when I don't have a clean POI, I'd rather just make my POI bigger and then wait for confirmation, and that'll give me what I need to see, which is exactly what we were able to do in this case, right? So as we see, we waited for price to, let's move over a little. So we waited for price to then take out all of this liquidity and tap into our POI. But as we saw, right, it gave an initial tap that was very aggressive. And so some people would have wanted to take a risk entry right here, and that is completely fine to do. But in that case, you're now changing that trade, so you would technically need to have a stop loss of this, right? Because we want our trade entry to be based on what that trade is telling us at the time, right? And at the time, we hadn't got any type of lower time frame confirmation to say we could do anything else, right? So myself personally, especially when I see a wick like this, very unhealthy, I was okay to wait for that to actually get swept, right? So what do we see? Right, price takes that high, and literally as soon as it takes that high, comes right back down and takes the previous low, right? So that's already initiation for a move to the downside. So technically we could have taken our entry right here, right? But I wanted to wait a little bit more and play a little bit safer, so I waited for price to come down and take that low one more time, right? So as soon as it took that low, I knew I could take my entry literally right here if I wanted to, but I waited for a little bit of pullback, right? And the reason I say I could have taken my entry here, which I typically wouldn't do, I always want to wait for a pullback, but in this case we had an okay area of 8 pips, so I was fine with that as a stop loss, right? So we see on this next candle, went ahead and took my entry there. So after that, I mean, really it was just off to the races. As we were coming down, this change of character became my first point of interest, just to obviously make sure that the trade is doing what it's supposed to. So we see that nice break there, and I believe around here or somewhere is where I took those first partials, or where we would have took first partials, right? And then after that, once again, we're just moving back to our higher time frame. So after we take our first partials and go break even, there's not really anything else to the trade, right? If we want to take partials more along the way, we're free to do so, but we have to remember, right, if we want to catch those big trades, you gotta let the trade do its thing, right? So in this case, what do? We go back up to our higher time frame to monitor. We just let the trade play out, right? And in this case, once again, ran perfectly down to our TP, right? Boom, and that's that 1 to 30, and we were able to walk off with a nice clean trade. So hope everybody enjoyed that little breakdown. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I will get back to them as soon as I see them.